Welcome into episode 32 of the Josh Hendrickson Show. I'm Neal McCready here in the Clark Ford Studios, joined in the aforementioned Clark Ford Studios by Josh Hendrickson, the host of this show and also the chair of economics at the University of Mississippi. Josh, how are you?
Doing well.
Good to be back. Our last episode for November. We gotta mute that. We got Thanksgiving 2 weeks from tomorrow. Is that right?
Yeah.
2 weeks from tomorrow. So we got big Thanksgiving plans. Free agency has begun in Major League Baseball. My annual hopes dashed time of the year. I could go down a long list of people that I've gotten my hopes up, ranging all the way back to like Hubie Brooks. Remember Hubie Brooks, the Expos? Carlos Beltran. That was a big one. I was dialed in on Carlos Beltran. Someone told me they had a chance. Bryce Harper. Carson asked Theo Epstein about Bryce Harper at Cubs convention, got the answer that I went, oh, that's over. No chance at all. Yeah, so it's that time of year. So this year it's no Juan Soto, no Max Fried, probably some washed up reliever. Maybe they can trade Greg Maddux again. So we'll talk about those things maybe a little bit too. All right, so the last time we were together, it was the day after the presidential election. So a week later, California is still counting the votes. Wanting to get to the bottom of that. That has led some people to push back against you and I both on both sides of this issue, by the way. The vote totals look different than they have in years past. And so some people are like, why can't you just admit the 2020 election is stolen? And other people are like, look, by the time they get through counting the numbers, it's going to be roughly the same. Why can't you admit the 2020 election was legit? You want to respond to both of those sets of people.
Yeah, I think, look, I think we had a lot of fun on the last show, kind of just looking at those initial numbers and just like pointing out, sort of how bizarre that they looked. And one of the things, I guess, I don't know, one of the things I guess that we didn't take into account is just how simultaneously large and slow California is at counting their votes. I think they still only have 80% of the precincts reporting. No rush. Just we'll figure it out. So
it is kind of laid back out there,
Yeah, just that California lifestyle. And so, anyways, I mean, I guess my perspective on this is that I think in comparison to what we were talking about last week, we are going to be much closer to. We're going to end up much closer to where we were in 2020 than we initially kind of thought. I still think that we're not going to quite get there. I think we're still 8 million votes short of what we saw in 2020. So I think there is substantial distance. But kind of like my reply to both sides here is that I actually think that this is kind of almost like the best possible outcome for either side of that argument, right? Whether you think it was stolen, whether you think it wasn't, whether you thought we were unfair last time, whether you or not. And I think the reason is that when you look at this, one of the things that was kind of important about this election is the people who sort of said, oh, they cheated in 2020. Well, the natural question was, well, why do you care then now, right? Because if they cheated before, they could cheat again, and so the fact that Trump won gives you some indication that, to the extent that they can actually cheat, that it would be extremely limited. Now, we had a lot of fun with this. And look, I mean, part of what I was complaining about is that some of this stuff just has to happen in every election anyway, right? It's just that it's not big enough to make to make a difference. But the point here is that with Trump winning the way that he did, and with the vote totals catching up to the 2020 totals, I think that's actually just the best case scenario for everybody, because we can just forget about 2020, right? We can stop having the debate about 2020. And we can get a little bit of closure here where it's like, look, we still have elections where where Republicans can win or Donald Trump can win, right? It's not that it's much harder to make the case that that you've got this rampant cheating going on now than it was before. But also it goes to show you that there is on the other side of that, there is a lot of popular support for Donald Trump. And so it doesn't take away from what happened in this election. And in fact, is kind of reinforced by this election that just, Trump won the popular vote and the Electoral College. He won it fairly easily. And I think that was contrary to what a lot of people had predicted. And so I think that, the fact that we're going to catch up closer to 2020 vote totals is actually a good thing. And so even though we had a lot of fun with it, I still, I do think it's a good thing that it'll be a little bit closer because, it will hopefully remove some of those doubts from before, but then also, sort of demonstrate to people that a popular candidate can still win.
Speaking of popular candidates, Trump is making some appointments, his nominations as presidents-elect are apt to do. He does have a government to prepare for come January the 20th. One of the picks today is exploding heads on the left. I mean, I'm surprised Jake Tapper is still with us. I mean, Jake has had an hour. Like right now, Jake is just, I don't know what Jake drinks after work, if it's like a martini or a scotch, but right now that's all he can think about is how he can get to that libation. Donald Trump has picked Matt Gaetz, the congressman from Florida, as his nomination for attorney general. And I got to tell you, I'm not one to wish time away. We have Thanksgiving coming up, Christmas, New Year's. It's my son's senior season of soccer. It's the last one. I'm going to miss it. But I got to tell you, the one thing I can tell you is going to be consolation for the post-holiday doldrums. These confirmation hearings are going to be an absolute – these are going to be a banger.
Well,
I mean, Matt Gaetz.
Okay, here's the most important thing about this, actually, is that the most important thing is like the Trump administration is actually much more prepared than they were the last time around. So like, it's not as though he's picking the people that he's picking because he just sort of doesn't really know who to pick or he doesn't know who the best person is. Like, when you look at the selections that he's made, it seems very, very clear that like the vast majority of these people, like they knew in advance, like this is who we're going to put in this spot. This is who we're going to put in this spot. This is who we're going to put in this spot. The Gaetz thing, I mean, I don't think Gaetz can get confirmed. I don't see how that's going to happen. Like, I mean, moderate Republicans have already come out and said like, come on, this is not this is not a serious proposal. But
I mean, this is trolling, right?
Well, I think
in a way,
I mean, I think it kind of is, but like, let's look at it this way. I think that the Trump administration wants to come in and they want to clear out the bureaucracy, right? Like they're
clearly,
they very clearly recognize that the last time around there were people who work in the bureaucracy that were undermining them and that they need dramatic reform in a lot of these agencies. And so I do think on some level maybe it's trolling, but I also think that it's not like pure trolling. Like it's not just to, be provocative. Like I think that he actually wants Gaetz in those hearings because Gaetz will say things, that he wants him to say, right? When he goes to those hearings, he's just going to be he's just going to be talking about all the corruption within the Department of Justice over the last several years. And he's going to be highlighting those things and he's going to be unafraid to say those things, especially because if he anticipates that he's not actually going to get confirmed, which I don't think that he will, then he's going to be even more willing to say those things because he gets those things out into the open and into the air and it creates conversation. And that's like we've talked about this before. That's how Trump gets his message out is, he likes to say provocative things that the media, about stuff that the media won't talk about. And Gaetz will do the same thing. And so those hearings are going to provoke those things. But I think if you look at it, though, too, there's also an element of negotiation here, right? Because what you do is you probably want to have some people that aren't going to be that face hurdles to confirmation as part of that process because you kind of want to go, hey, look, Fine, you vote against that guy, but this guy gets
Right.
in,
That's what I
right?
think
And so
too.
it's just a way to kind of negotiate. Look, okay, well, we understand you're not gonna do that, but you need to do this because we're gonna let you have that, but you got to do this. And I think there's a lot of that going on.
Yeah, I mean, one of those is Pete Hegseth. Been nominated to be Department of Defense. He's a war vet. They've gotten they being our friends at CNN and others, very hung up on him being a host of a TV show on Fox News. He's Fox, what's it called? Fox News Morning or something on the weekends. He's on there. He's a decorated war vet. He's got an Ivy League education, which I think Trump's big on still. It gives me a chance, really, because, I mean, Ivy League, Harvard on the Bayou. I mean, I'm making a call. But he's got him, Marco Rubio, not controversial, but, there was a time. Tulsi Gabbard. I think RFK Jr. is coming. That's the rumor that there's a big announcement coming involving him. I do wonder if Gates is just kind of like, all right, here's your pound of flesh. Here's our interference. Here's your win, and we're going to take ours. I do kind of think there's something to that. One thing I like, though, is that unlike 16, where I think he won and didn't expect to win, and they sort of just weren't prepared for this. If you remember, there was almost kind of a news void for a few weeks because there was almost like, well, now what do we do? There's a plan this time. You now know beyond a shadow of a doubt that they planned to win, intended to win, and believed they would win. This has been a pretty quick rollout. It's only been 8 days.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think, the funny thing, okay, the funny thing about Hegseth is that this guy is a combat veteran. He graduated from Harvard. He has actually been involved in like veterans organizations and things like that. And he has actually been talking a lot about corruption in veterans organizations, about fixing the VA, about reforming the Department of Defense and getting rid of all of the like woke stuff, for lack of a better term. And he's been on top of this, and he's been actually going out and talking about this for a long time. And when you look at it, I mean, the way that the media has covered it is, Fox News host nominated for a department
just this guy that's been on TV.
Defense.
Yeah,
and it's like, okay, but like that's a completely unfair way to frame it. The other thing is like one of my favorite things to read is Politico, because Politico will tell you, like, Politico is just the most batshit crazy stuff that you can read. But it's coming directly from the sort of Washington elite. That's where it's coming from. And so Politico had a story this morning, and the headline was literally, "Who the F is this guy?" and then, but the best part about it is they completely buried the lead. So you start reading Politico, and they have the direct quote, like, "Yeah, who the F is this guy?" And then it's like, "Said a lobbyist who agreed to talk to us, anonymously." And it was like, oh, the lobbyist is upset. Oh, well, we should be really concerned now, right? Like,
Yeah.
that's, and also it really cracks me up because, one of Obama's like main national security advisors, and who was like instrumental in like the Iran deal, was this guy Ben Rhodes. And like Ben Rhodes has like an MFA in literature or something like that. So like not really clear on like why sometimes your background counts and sometimes it doesn't, because if we're comparing him to Ben Rhodes, like, he's infinitely more qualified. He's seen combat, right? He has it, he's gone to Harvard. He's graduated from Harvard, right? He's done all of these things since leaving. I think that basically the backlash to that one, I think, is that, a lot of people in defense circles, they're just looking for the good old boy to kind of get in there, and he's not going to be one of those people. But I think this points to what Trump is after, because if you, I would recommend that everybody go out and find this Hegseth interview. Like, he did an interview, I think, with Sean Ryan, the Navy SEAL, who has a podcast.
Yeah.
He did like something like an hour and a half podcast with him, just a couple of weeks ago. And if you listen to it, like, this guy is really intelligent. And he's really passionate about fixing stuff. Like, he's like, look, the VA is broken. Like, we have to fix the VA. Like, it's not working. Like, we have to take care of our veterans. We don't do a good job taking care of our veterans. And he's also pointed out that, like, one of the reasons that we don't get these reforms is a lot of veterans organizations don't want to speak up, and they kind of just enable the corruption that goes on within these agencies. And so he actually has a lot of interesting things to say. He also has a lot of interesting things to say about the priorities of the Department of Defense and who's getting promoted and the kinds of things that they're talking about. And so I don't know. I thought it was a really interesting interview. I thought that, like, he came across as very intelligent. He came across as somebody who really thinks that the Department of Defense needs to be reformed. And so, to me, I mean, I think the guy deserves a shot. Like, he sounds like the right type of person, even if it doesn't turn out to be him. He's the right type of person for the job.
I think he's the kind of person that people voted for.
Yes.
I mean, I think that's the key thing that gets lost in this whole, hey, we actually have a democracy. We had choices. The two choices could not have been more different from one another. And I don't mean this as a slap at anyone. I just mean this as a fact. You had Harris-Walz, Trump-Vance. They didn't have a hell of a lot in common, right? They only debated once, but they talked a lot. We got to listen to them. We went to the polls and we voted. And we voted for what Trump is saying, which is, we want this to change. We want different people. We don't want more bureaucrats. I told you this a week ago. It was only over for 12 hours. And I'm like, look, he gets like a week or so to sort of drink the champagne, if you will, take a break. I mean, I think he's earned a break. But then I would go to work, man. I mean, you're on the clock. Because January the 20th at 12:01, I'm not blaming Biden anymore. It's like when you fire the football coach and you hire the new coach and you bring the new coach in. I can't stand it when they're like, well, I inherited a mess. I know, no shit. That's why they fired that guy. That's why he got fired. If he was kicking ass, he'd still be here. So get to work. Let's go. And that's where I am with Trump. And I think that's where a lot of people are with, okay, shake it up. So New York Times 2 hours ago, headline. Is it possible for Trump to shut down the Department of Education? CNN, how Trump's pledge to scrap the Department of Education could impact blah, blah, blah. Vox, could Trump actually get rid of the Department of Education? I bet if I asked 100 Americans, when was the Department of Education founded? When did it start? I bet you they couldn't come close. They would go, like the 1800s or something. No, 1979, Jimmy Carter. October 17th, 1979, Jimmy Carter. I actually think Trump is serious about this. And I think it's something that the majority of Americans absolutely want. It doesn't work. Blow it up.
No, I hope that he does it. And one of the reasons that I hope that he does it is that we should be returning more of the power surrounding education to the states. We should let the states have more control over this. We should not be setting federal guidelines. And also, not only should we not be setting federal guidelines, but like the federal guidelines are terrible. Like, they're absolutely terrible. Like, like a prime example of these kinds of things is like when they introduced like Common Core math. Remember?
Oh,
Common Core math.
Yeah.
Common Core math is like,
it was the freaking worst.
Common Core math was like, here's a math problem. Why don't you take 30 extra steps? Like, that was how it was. Like, I'm not joking when I say this. Like, people probably are going to get mad when I say this because it's going to make me sound like completely arrogant and obnoxious. But Common Core math, like, for example, always struck me as like, this is how like a really dumb person learned how to do math.
Yep.
Like, that's what it struck me as.
Yep.
And I just I could never understand those things. But setting that aside.
Well, no, but hold on a second. I remember being in the 4th grade, Mrs. Boyd's class. And we had multiplication drills. And it was a very simple thing. You had to pass the test. You had to get it 100% right. And you had to do it within the time limit, 3 straight days. And once you did, when the math test came, you got to pick up, haul ass, go out to the recess because you'd walk out of her class, go to the left, go down the open hallway, out onto the playground. And you got like the next 30 minutes to. You want to throw a ball, swing on the swing, whatever you want to do. It's up to you because you've passed. But until you passed, you kept taking that thing. And if you failed it one time, you started all the way back over. So it was like a big deal. But it was simple. You learned what 8 times 6 was. You just memorized the damn things, because those are math facts that you're just going to need to know for the rest of your life. Division, multiplication, addition, subtraction of single-digit numbers. If you get that, the rest of math is doable. Without that, you don't have. But they, instead of going, hey, kids, you're just going to have to memorize that 8 times 7 is 56. It always will be, forever and ever.
Well, and the thing about this is like, okay, a lot of people are sort of instinctively like, oh, we can't get rid of the Department of Education. Education is important. And it's like, no, that's not the question. The question is not, is education important? It's that, does the Department of Education actually contribute to education, right? Like that's the question. And here's the bigger problem. The bigger problem with the Department of Education, and the bigger problem with respect to education more generally, is that our educational system has really been corrupted. Like, it's been completely corrupted, and it's been corrupted like on purpose. Like, so there are people who want control over the curriculum. There are a bunch of people who fight over the control of the curriculum. There are people who want to set standards. This is why I would prefer that all of these things are like local and state, because if they're local and state based, you have much more control over what's going on in your children's school than when this is coming from the federal bureaucracy in Washington, D.C. And what you've seen happen is that, you know, this gets to actually a much bigger point that relates to all of these other bureaucracies. Right. And that much bigger point that they get to is that, you know, if you're upset with sort of like the existing hierarchy in society and you want to disrupt that hierarchy, like what you have to do is like, you've got to find ways to unite people at different parts of that hierarchy to sort of work against it and get rid of it. Right. And this is a lot of like where this like Marxism stuff comes from. Right. Like, they're deliberately, like, there are a bunch of people who kind of, you know, pivoted Marxism into being much more about, you know, they pivoted Marxism away from sort of like the economics, like class arguments, and they pivoted much more towards just like identity politics. And then they have used this to kind of reshape the curriculum in the schools, to change, you know, the guidelines to think about what you learn in school. And so the thing is like, you're going through these classes and you're learning like a particular version of history. Right? Forget the math for a second, right? Like, you're learning a particular version of history. Well, who gets to write the history book? Who gets to determine what the curriculum is? And what you've seen is that over the last, you know, several years, in fact, like the last several decades, is you've just seen that the erosion in sort of how people are taught about American history, right? American history used to be much more about, you know, sort of like the American Revolution and then the significant subsequent events, right? Like, of your choice. Okay. But now it's been completely reframed, and like everything is sort of like a criticism of the United States. And it's all like, well, yeah, the United States does this, but like look at all these bad things that the United States has done, or like, let's reframe this way. And I've never understood this. I've never understood this at all. I remember when I was an undergrad, I took this history class, and we were assigned to read, this is actually like the reason I decided to be an academic. We were assigned to read a book that was called Lies My Teacher Told Me. It was by some sociologist. I don't remember the name. People can Google it. It is quite possibly the worst book that I have ever read in my entire life, because
Does this guy still teach at Ole Miss?
Wrong sociology.
Oh, wrong one. Sorry.
But
sorry.
But it was the worst book ever, because it was basically just ranting and raving that like, we don't teach people that like Helen Keller was a socialist or something like that. It's like, that's not relevant to anything that we care about, right? Like, this is not, and that's what it was. It was all whining. But then it was also like, we don't teach about how America is an inherently racist country. And let me tell you how he described how he knows that it is he said, you know, America is fundamentally, you know, biased racially and by class. And the way that he argued this is, he said, well, there was this group of sociology students, and what they did is they went out and they drove like a really nice car, and they would get behind somebody at a red light, and the second the light turned green, they would honk like crazy at the people, and then they would see like what kind of response that they got, right? And then they would drive around in like this really crappy car, and they would pull up behind these people at a red light, and they would honk like crazy the second it turned green. and then see how people responded in that way. And he was like, and they found that like systematically people responded more to the to like the really nice car than the other car. And I was like, this is not even remotely a controlled experiment.
No.
Like the person in front of you is never the same person. That who knows what that person in front of you is doing, right? Who knows if they even looked in the rearview mirror? Like all of these things, like that they're just like taking for granted. But the whole thing is like this was the worst. This was the worst book I've ever read. But the idea was, it's like we need to be teaching about all of these things in school. And it was basically just like left-wing talking point after left-wing talking point, and not even like moderate left-wing talking point, right? It was like radical left-wing talking point. And like this was what we should have in the schools. And they've been pushing that and pushing that. And like, and the thing is that like, you know, I can sit here and laugh at the guy, but like that guy actually, you know, like people like him actually did push our educational system in that direction. And we have to go back. Like we got to get back to the fundamental, you know, to the fundamental nature of what we're teaching. Like go around the world. Do you think that if you take a history class in China, they talk about how shitty China is? Do you think you go over there and they're just like, listen to all the terrible things we've done? Right? No, they don't do that. They don't do that. You know, when you go to these places, like this is not that's not what you're doing. And actually it does get back to the math thing. Because like another problem with the Common Core math is the same problem. Like when you're teaching very, very young children, all you should be doing is just teaching them basic facts that they can memorize.
Yes.
Like when they're learning American history, they just need to know what year the Declaration of Independence was written. They need to know who wrote it. They need to know who signed it. They need to know like when the Constitutional Convention was, right? They need to know who the first president of the United States is. They just have to memorize these things. That you just teach them about it and you memorize it. It's the same thing with math. Just teach them multiplication tables, make them memorize it. As you get older, that's when you can introduce more critical thinking and stuff like that. But that's because they already have
building blocks.
Yes, they already have this basic foundation of knowledge that you can build upon. And so we've gotten completely away from that. And then, you know, and we just want to push all of this crazy sort of ideology and these crazy weird ways of learning math on people because we think that they're not learning it properly. Like, have our test scores gone up? No.
No, we've gotten dumber.
No, when you look at international test scores, the United States does not perform well. Okay? So like what success is this Department of Education actually having?
Yeah.
It's completely unclear.
It's
So look,
bad.
I mean, I hope that he's serious about it, and I hope that the people who are so worried about it continue to cope and seethe, because this is something that's actually important, that actually deserves a conversation, and that actually deserves to be heard. And we need to get away from that. Also, how did the Department of Education do during COVID? How did they do during COVID? Are these the people that you want in charge? Like, I don't think so.
No. They failed kids.
No. And here's the thing. People will say, this is the other argument people will say, is they'll say, oh, well, you know, the Department of Education, it's not just setting standards, like, you know, it's giving resources to people. You can still give resources. The federal government can put appropriations in to send to the state of Mississippi, to send to the state of Alabama and say, here, this is for education. You have to use it for education.
100%.
They can do that.
Yes.
They can do that without the Department of Education.
Yes. All right, let's run through some questions in the stream. Jay Robertson wants to know, can you comment on Bitcoin and the prospect of Trump establishing a strategic reserve?
Okay, so Donald Trump kind of gave a talk last year at the sort of big Bitcoin conference, and he essentially said, hey, we're going to establish a Bitcoin reserve. So the United States is actually just going to hold Bitcoin on its balance sheet, just like it does various other assets, right? So the United States government owns a bunch of land, they own a bunch of gold, right? They own a bunch of assets, and Trump has said that he thinks that the United States government should do that. It's unclear how serious he is. If you look at betting markets have contracts on this, and they're putting the percentage, I think, around like 30% that he'll actually follow through on it. But if you look at the price of Bitcoin seems to suggest that that market participants at least believe that it's a possibility, because the price has been skyrocketing for, you know, the past several days. I don't know if I don't know if people want more details about that, but I think, like, you know, I think that part of this was part of this was political. Part of this was him reaching out to a community that he knew would come out and vote, and that he knew would be you know, enthusiastic about his support. Now, the interesting question will be, can the people who kind of got him to advocate these things actually convince him to sort of follow through on it?
What do you think?
I think that there's actually a good chance, because I think that they realized that this could be a potentially solid voting block for them, and it's predominantly young people who are sort of enthusiastic about it, and so like that's a voting demographic that traditionally Republicans struggle with, and I think that actually like one of the interesting things will be, once we get like the more sophisticated post-election polling, one of the things that will be interesting is to see exactly how much like younger voters actually cared about that kind of thing.
All right, we got let's see. Gron wants to know what's your take on a state like Missouri went for Trump by a large margin, but passed some progressive amendments like raising the minimum wage and loosening abortion laws.
Well, I mean, first of all, I think that if you look at Donald Trump's victory, the funny thing is that in 2016, one of the things that people were saying is that Trump was going to be pulling down a lot of like down ballot Republicans, right? That Trump wasn't popular, and so his lack of popularity was going to pull these people down. If you look at Trump this time around, like in a lot of these states where you had competitive Senate races, he was actually pulling the Republican up. So we had this dramatic reversal in just 8 years, where people were saying, "Hey, he's going to pull these people down." To this time around, it seems like he pulled people up. Like Michigan is a very, very hard state to win for Republicans always, but like Trump won the state, but they still elected a Democratic senator. So I think that when you look at these things, I mean, I think the issue is that on abortion, I never really know how to interpret these things, because if you look at the American public is pretty consistent, where it's like, hey, look, in the first trimester, they're kind of okay with abortion. It's like after the first trimester where public opinion starts to all of a sudden move in the other direction. And so I think that a lot of Republicans have kind of pushed for very, very strict limits on abortion, and have probably gone too far. And so when you look at Missouri and places like that, I think that I think that a lot of these kinds of issues are in some ways a pushback against some of that restrictive stuff. On the minimum wage, I think there's two issues here. The minimum wage, for whatever you think of the minimum wage just tends to be a popular thing. And the other thing is that I'm actually not convinced that this is necessarily like a Democrat versus Republican issue. I would say 20 years ago, if you asked about the minimum wage, I would say most Republicans are going to be against it, and most Democrats are going to be for it. But I actually think that now we're seeing a lot more of a realignment. So I actually, the evidence from Missouri would suggest that there's, a decent chunk of Trump voters that are actually in favor of raising the minimum wage. Look, the minimum wage is not a very effective tool for helping low wage workers.
No.
But the thing is that it's a popular thing to do. And so it's not surprising to me that a policy like that would pass. And it's not necessarily surprising to me that, Trump voters, that people that the same person who voted for Trump might also vote for the minimum wage, because I think that there's a sort of changing nature of the sort of changing nature of where the support for the Republican Party is coming from, would indicate that you would expect a little bit of that.
Joshua wants to know, is there any way we could get term limits for the U.S. Congress? And if so, how could we go about doing that? It's not realistic right now.
Well,
because they're totally against it.
Well, I mean, it's going to be a challenge, because like, how do you get term limits when the people who have to enact those term limits are the people who will be subject to them, right? I mean, and the other thing is it's not just about term limits. You also have to think about what the length of the term limits are, right? So if you're going to impose term limits, what does that mean? Like, how many terms can you serve? Like if you're in the House, you only serve 2 years. And so like, I think we don't really want, you can only serve one term in the House, because by the time you get there and learn how the House works, like, well, your term is up and you leave. And so there's a question about, well, how long should these terms be? I mean, I think that if you could if you could really get if you're willing to burn some political capital, I think you can move people in that direction. And I think that, Trump has actually kind of hinted that he would like to, to kind of create term limits. But, that's conditional on getting people to, it's conditional on, on getting the representatives who are currently serving to vote against their own interests in a lot of cases. And so you would have to hope that you have enough representatives that are principled enough to say, yes, we think this is a good thing. But I do think that, there should be some kind of there should be some kind of push, because we're getting to the point where we have too many career politicians, people who just never leave DC. And at a certain point, the longer you're there, the more institutional knowledge you have and the more effective that you can be. But there's diminishing returns to that, right?
Yeah, we don't need a senator for 30 years.
Well, look, when I lived in Michigan, my representative was John Dingell. Okay, John Dingell's dad served in the House of Representatives, and when he died, John Dingell was appointed. John Dingell was in office for a ridiculous amount of time. And then when he died, they appointed his wife to his seat. So the Dingells have held this seat for decades after decades after decades. This is like a century or something of the seat belonging to. This is ridiculous. That sort of thing is that. I'm sorry, but that's not helping anybody. I don't care if you're the biggest Dingell fan out there. This isn't helping anybody.
I mean, nothing. Stop, Neal. Just. All right. Grind also says, I see there are plans on placing oil restrictions on Iran. Why are we sure they'll comply, and what will that cause prices to increase if they end up charging more per barrel? Where's the offset coming from?
Well, so there are a couple of things. So when it comes to these kinds of sanctions, a lot of times what you're really trying to do is you're just trying to make it much harder for these countries to engage in the activity.
Yeah.
So when we put sanctions on countries, then we also have secondary sanctions, and the secondary sanctions are basically if you buy oil from Iran, then we're also going to put some sanctions on you because you're allowing them to circumvent our sanctions.
Mm-hmm.
Essentially, what you're trying to do with sanctions is you're really just trying to sort of increase the costs on these people. You're trying to make it much harder for them. They'll still be able to sell their oil. There's still going to be people who are going to. There's still going to be countries who do it.
Yeah.
There are going to be countries that make secret agreements with them to do it and things like that. But you're just trying to make it much, much harder, right? You're trying to make it much harder for them to do business. Trying to make it much harder for them to carry that out. Now that does sort of restrict the oil supply. And so in terms of thinking about where the offset is, well, I mean, one of the interesting things will be to see what the Trump administration does with energy, right? So,
well, he's been pretty transparent.
Yeah. And so what's going to be really interesting is this how much they move in that direction. I think that they intend to essentially just make it much, much easier, for people to drill, to people to operate refineries, for fracking.
They're going to take away some of the restrictions and some of the regulations. And I mean, it's one of the things he said on basically every stop was the whole drill, baby, drill thing. And in fairness to Trump in 2017, that's exactly what he did. And I mean, this time, I know that he made a joke today and the left went nuts with it. It was a joke. The House isn't going to change the Constitution to let him run again. He was telling a joke. So, I mean, there's nothing stopping him from going for it. Again, I think it's one of the reasons people voted for him.
Well, and I think this is actually something that's probably really easy to predict. Is I think that they're going to relax a lot of regulations and restrictions on oil and gas, and I think that, and so that will actually go a long way to alleviate any of this pressure that's coming from the fact that Iran's oil supply is effectively off limits. So I think that so the question is, what are the relative magnitudes, right? Can the United States make up for that? I think the answer is yes, actually. I think I think one of the stories that doesn't get enough, that people don't talk about enough, is just how much that the United States has actually become essentially the leading oil producer in the world, right? So the people People all tend to think of, well, it's just the Middle East, it's whatever. Well, the United States is always right up there, even with the restrictions of the Biden administration. Like the United States is up there, and so so I think the amount of deregulation that they do, I think that's going to open up a lot more supply, and then that will sort of counteract those other effects.
A guy named Tyler Siskey, interesting name. He says, I need Josh's take on the Oversight Committee hearing on UAPs. Thank you for the question, Tyler. Thanks for being a part of MPW Digital here today. Hope you see you again soon.
Oh, man. I don't know what to think about this. Like, it just seems really weird to me that all of a sudden we're just going to talk about this. Like that's my general impression. I find it very odd that all of a sudden we're just talking about it. Like for years we were just like, oh, people are crazy. Like there's nothing happening here. Well, maybe this is just the longest version of it's not happening and it's good that it is that we've ever seen. Maybe that's what's going on. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't know what to believe here. I mean, I certainly believe that there's something going on. And in fact, like I've talked to people who know this stuff way better than me. I've talked to people in intelligence circles, and
in case people are wondering
fascinated.
what we're talking about, because it's normally UFOs. It's the Siskey person was trying to be sophisticated, apparently. Unidentified aerial phenomenon.
Well, I think that the fascinating thing here is that we have gotten confirmation that there is something funny going on. And so, I think that it'll be interesting to see what we find out. I mean, actually, that's one of the things I'm interested to see, because one of the promises that Trump made, right, is like, we're gonna open up and we're gonna be transparent about a bunch of this stuff, right? Like, we're gonna open up the JFK files. We're gonna talk about UFOs. We're gonna do
and if he doesn't, people are gonna be rightfully pissed off.
Yeah. Yeah, and so I think it'll actually be one of the interesting things, and like all of this UAP stuff, though, like it's very weird to me, right? Because if you do know something, and you're keeping what you know secret, why would you want this information to be public? And it seems like they're allowing some of this information to be public. And so I'm not really sure what's happening here. Like, it might be sort of this like limited hangout kind of thing where like they have secret information and they let you know just like a little bit of it, and then they kind of pretend that that's the only thing that they know. But I mean, it is fascinating. I mean, we have gotten to the point where they're basically admitting now that, like, yeah, look, people are seeing these things, and we need to investigate them at the very least. I think that in and of itself is fascinating. I didn't, this is something that used to only be on the Joe Rogan podcast, right?
Yeah.
And now it's like completely mainstream. Like CNN's like, oh, today we had a hearing on
UAPs. Kyle Wilson says, Neal, a week ago I texted you about Biden stepping down, letting Harris be president for a month. That the odds of this changed with you. Kyle, first of all, thank you. Second of all, and I say this respectfully, did you see Joe Biden today, Kyle? I mean, I don't know if you noticed, but that was not an unhappy, miserable man. I mean, I don't know if you saw they were having some sort of little ceremony yesterday, and Jill Biden was sitting next to Kamala Harris, who was sitting next to poor Dougie. I actually felt sorry for Dougie. The look on Dougie's face was, oh shit, it's going to be another one of those nights. I mean, listen, I can't promise you that Joe Biden's going to live for another 70 days. We're all day to day. But as long as that guy's got a pulse, she's not becoming president. Feel free to disagree. He's not letting her have that moment.
The look on Joe Biden's face when he was meeting with Trump today is like Trump said to him, I went and worked at McDonald's and I fixed all the ice cream machines. That's the look that he had on his face. That's the look that he had on his face. Is it like, listen, Joe, the ice cream machines, they are fixed. That's how excited he looked. Like, I mean, he was joyous.
He did.
Him and Trump were making fun of the media. They're laughing together.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
almost like this whole thing's the joke's been on us. I mean, wow.
I don't care what anybody says. Like, Joe Biden might hate Donald Trump, but I think it's possible that he hates Kamala Harris a little bit more.
Josh, I don't think it's possible. I mean, I think that's a certainty. Listen, we'll never know how everyone voted in Delaware, but I can tell you Trump got at least 2 votes in Delaware.
Well, Joe Biden showed up in a red,
bright red. St. Louis.
It was Republican red. It was like whatever the official like shade of red of the Republican Party is. That's what she wore. Like it was like custom made to be like, I want this to match the actual Republican logo. Like,
yeah, I mean, like Ole Miss wears red jerseys sometimes. You know, Georgia wears red jerseys, and it was redder than those jerseys. Yes. It was more red than a St. Louis Cardinals cap.
Yes.
I mean, that was intentional. That was like, hey, there's this design. No. We're wearing red, the brightest red. And I'd like to offset it with just a simple white blouse because I want to accentuate the fact that I am wearing red today on election day.
And she had a big smile on her face.
And was happy.
Which suggests like, it suggests that like she thinks people might be in on the joke, right? Or that people might be speculating about why she's wearing the red suit.
Inauguration Day is going to be crazy because I now believe Biden's going to do the whole song and dance. He's going to get in the limo and he's going to ride with Trump up Pennsylvania and go to the Capitol and do the introduced as the president one last time. And I think he's going to sit there for Trump's speech. I don't know what she's going to do.
Well, you know the really
she's going to combust, man.
Well, you know the really weird thing about this is that there's an incredible disconnect between sort of like the party leaders in the Democratic Party and then like the people who are on whatever that insane show on CNN is where they just have like the circle of people. It's like the circle of hate, whatever that show is, where they're all just sitting around in a circle yelling at each other. The
circle of hate.
Like the left-wing people on that show, they are losing their minds because they genuinely believe, like when the media was coming out and saying Trump is Hitler, these people were like, finally, someone had the guts to say it, right? Like that's their position. But you look at a lot of like you look at a lot of Democratic leaders, and they seem to basically be like, well, we lost. You know, like, and just sort of completely moving on from that, just completely being like, well, you know, we tried calling this guy Hitler. It didn't work. Oh, well, all's fair. And just like, let's move on. And so it is actually like this really weird juxtaposition because I kind of find it amusing that kind of like the leaders of the Democratic Party are just kind of resigned to the fact that like, hey, Trump won. He kind of crushed us. Like we lost. And then, but like the sort of like true believers, the sort of, ideologues that go on that circle of hate show, like they're still just as fired up as they were before. And they can't believe that somebody would vote for Donald Trump. They're still in that position. Like they're still in a state of denial.
Grind says Joe Biden did not look like democracy was on the ballot today.
He did not.
He didn't. Oh God! Yeah, I like what Corinne's Pierre, whatever.
Well, hold on though.
Yeah,
the people. Remember, we talked about this. The people who agreed that democracy was on the ballot voted for Trump by 6 points. So actually, he
may have. Corinne St. Pierre, whatever her name is. She's like, well, they met for 2 hours. I mean, that should tell you a lot. It's like, yeah, they were like ripping her for 30 minutes. Wow. Let's see. What was the other one? I'm sorry. All right. Let's see. It was about. All right. Chauncey wants to know, do you think Elon and the Doge team are going to come in and fire a bunch of federal employees? As a federal employee, it bothers me. They keep posting the Office Space meme. Can Doge really create enough efficiency to affect our debt and spending? Isn't government just inefficient by nature? That's two people asking questions about the same topic.
So, I mean, we'll see where this goes. I mean, there's like, look, I don't know how much money that they can save from the low-hanging fruit, but there's actually a lot of low-hanging fruit, even putting aside like the bureaucracy for a second. Like there are just these websites that keep track of like what these agencies are funding. like what kind of like academic research that they're funding and stuff like that. And if you can ever find one of these websites, I can't think of one off the top of my head. I wish I would have thought of this before we started, because I would tell it to people so they could go, because it's the most entertaining reading of all time, because you read about these grants and what they're being used for, and it's the most ridiculous stuff imaginable. And so I think like that kind of like low hanging fruit, you know, cutting out that stuff, I mean, that's going to cut out like hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars a year. Now, in the grand scheme of things, is that big of a deal? No. But is it worthwhile to do? I think that the answer is yes. The other thing is that I do think that periodically you have to go through periods of time where people are going to evaluate the performance of any agency. Right. And part of the problem, and look, part of the problem is, and you can even talk to bureaucrats in Washington, D.C. who will tell you this, just career bureaucrats will tell you this. They don't like some of these rules. They don't like it that it's very, very difficult to fire someone. They don't like that because the people that protects are not the good workers. They're not the good productive workers. The rules, those rules protect the people that everybody wants to get rid of but can't. And so, and so I do think that there needs to be some kind of reform. I do think that they need to be doing something. I'll be interested to see what this is like, because the idea here was, hey, we need somebody to come in and look at this, right? And like, I mean, I'm a little bit skeptical in the sense that like, I think Elon is serious about it, but you know, like Elon, he's like sort of busy, right? Like he has all of these other things going on.
I don't see him becoming a Washington bureaucrat for 4 years.
I mean, I think that like maybe Elon's role will just be symbolic, or maybe will be sort of like, you know, the 30,000 foot view of what's going on or something like that. But it will be interesting to see, because there are areas that need to be looked at. We do need to think about some of the things that we're doing. I mean, this happens all the time. I mean, this isn't something that's unique to government. This happens all the time. Like there's a famous story that there's a famous story about this where like Carl Icahn had said, he's this like billionaire investor who had said, like, you know, he bought the stock in this company and he took over the company, and then they went in like Office Space style, and you know, they were talking to people and they were trying to figure out, what does everybody do? And this one particular business, I can't remember which one it was, but this one particular business, there was like this entire floor of the building where they couldn't figure out what people do. Like they just couldn't figure it out. And so like they didn't know what to do. Like we can't figure out exactly what it is that they do. And so their idea was, okay, let's write down the names of the people who seem like they're the most competent people and who are most on top of things. Like let's take down like their information and get their contact information. And then we're just going to lay off the entire floor. And then when something breaks, we're going to take that handful of people, we're going to bring them back, and we're going to ask them to fix it. And the thing was like they got rid of everybody on that floor and nothing broke. And so they were still like, okay, what were these people doing? And so like, and that was going on in a for-profit corporation. Okay, so if it's going on in for-profit corporations, there's certainly some of that going on in government agencies.
So much.
And if you look at a lot of a lot of this, you see this everywhere. Long-lasting institutions just get really bloated, and periodically you do need
the University of fill in the blank.
Yes. I mean, look, you go to universities, there's way too many administrators. There are way too many people who are in positions where they never are in contact with a student, right? Mm-hmm. Like they never encounter a student at all. And look, some of those are valuable, and some of those, like, you know, like, okay, first of all, like accountants or something like that at the university, clearly they're not going to encounter a student, and clearly like they're useful. But there are lots of other jobs where that's not the case. And so in any big corporation, in any government agency, in any university, in any of these big institutions, there are going to be things like that. And so I do think that from time to time you should have an effort to do this. I mean, I think that the one thing that's commendable about this, if it actually turns out to be what it's claimed to be, is I think that the one positive thing about it, though, is that Trump was sort of like, this is a temporary thing. Like their work has to be done by like the 4th of July, 2026 or something like that. Right.
You'll love this story breaking today. You may have already heard about this, but maybe not. It just broke in the last little bit on the Wall Street Journal. The FBI seized the phone of the founder and CEO chief executive of PolyMarket, the crypto-based prediction market that was a popular platform for bets on the U.S. presidential election. A person familiar with the matter said federal agents woke Shane Copeland at his Manhattan home early Wednesday morning to carry out the search. The person said the raid was earlier reported by the New York Post. It wasn't immediately clear what prompted the FBI's search of Copeland, the 26-year-old entrepreneur behind one of the most successful prediction markets in history. But PolyMarket quickly tied the raid to its track record in the recent election, in which bettors on its platform correctly anticipated that Donald Trump would beat Kamala Harris. This is obviously political retribution by the outgoing administration against PolyMarket for providing a market that correctly called the 2024 presidential election, said a spokesman for the New York-based company. PolyMarket is a fully transparent prediction market that helps everyday people better understand the events that matter most to them, including elections. I mean, this does feel like, hey, you people shaped some opinion and we're mad at you.
Well, and it is very weird. And also, I saw these people who were making comments like, "Oh, you shouldn't be able to have these betting markets." But like, I mean, why? Why can't you? Why shouldn't you be able to?
Why not?
Why shouldn't you be able to predict the presidential election? I mean, we let people pick whether like the New Orleans Saints are going to.
Yeah. If I want to go to Vegas today and take Texas minus 15 against Arkansas, I can.
Yeah.
If I want to go and take Arkansas plus the 15, I can. If I want to jump on the ULM money line at Auburn on Saturday, I can. That's predicting. And if enough people jump on it and predict it, that's going to move the line. Why can't someone predict outcomes of Senate elections?
Yeah, and so it's really bizarre. Like, I'd like to find out like what this is about, because the timing seems really bad. And so, I would like to know more detail, because, look, I'm not going to discount what, I'm not going to discount that there was wrongdoing here. I mean, I remember when everybody's favorite, crypto guy, Sam Bankman-Fried, turned out to be running like the biggest fraud in the world. So, I mean, so I don't know what's going on here, but, it is really odd timing, especially with the amount of attention that they've been getting.
I think they're pissed.
Well, it's possible.
That's what I think.
Yeah.
I think they're pissed off. They're about to be out of power. I think Trump's going to shake up the FBI as well.
You mean Matt Gaetz, the head of the Department of Justice?
Is it bad that I really, even though I know he's not going to get it, I would kind of like to see it? I mean, I don't really want the chaos per se. I just want normalcy. I do want this return. I didn't get to hear it because when you're in the press box at Ole Miss and at most places, you're glassed in. It's kind of sterile. You can hear, but it's very muted. Even when it's a huge crowd and it's very loud, you'll hear the roar of the crowd, but it's not deafening. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
And so before the game against Georgia the other day, they did the national anthem. And I was listening because I anticipated it being different. I mean, like I was telling somebody, I mean, in a few minutes, we're going to divide into tribes, right? Everybody in the stadium, and the Georgia people are going to cheer for Georgia, and the Ole Miss people are going to cheer for Ole Miss. And that unity shit's going to go away for a little bit. But for those few minutes before we got going, everybody was Americans. And I kind of anticipated something. And Ole Miss did a flyover and all that stuff, and it was cool. And even in the press box, the one thing I could pick up that was different, because they do this at every football game I ever go to. And people usually just kind of like stand up for the national anthem, and they play the national anthem, and it's 2 minutes before the game gets going and the game ends and someone yells, "Go to hell, LSU," or something, and then we play football.
Mm-hmm.
I heard people singing, and they were getting louder. And in my mind, I thought, maybe this is my imagination. And then a buddy of mine who's there, whose daughter and my daughter are good friends, he sent me a text, and he said, the anthem gave me chills. And I was like, that's kind of what I heard too. but I wasn't out there. I'm in here. And he was like, no, it got louder and louder and louder. And it was like really neat, this America thing. Like I want Trump to kind of, I don't want it to be a revenge presidency, and I don't think it's going to be. I do kind of want some trolling because I think they deserve it. But what I really want is like this return to kind of some patriotism where it means something to be American, where we have this common thing. And I think that's what he's going for. I think it matters to him too. I'm kind of rambling a minute, but that's
No, but it gets back to how we started the podcast about the vote totals. Like, I think that the closer the vote totals get to 2020, the better this is for everybody.
Yeah.
Because it sort of causes a lot of the argumentation about the 2020 election to kind of dissipate. But it also illustrates that this was a decisive victory, and that after a decisive victory, you do have some leeway to go out and make policy, and that the country is not as divided as we're constantly told that it's divided. And I think that probably, like, part of what's going on there is it's probably in some sense like relief, right? Like we have just had just 8 years of just chaos.
Yeah.
And Trump kind of returning and winning decisively, you know, that decisiveness is the importance. Like, a lot of the uncertainty of the last several years has been, okay, Trump won a really close 2016, right? And then
didn't win the popular vote,
right?
Hillary claimed that it was a Russia thing. They did all the investigations, the impeachments. Then we had COVID. Then we had an election that Trump contested, and he said it was fixed and he wouldn't ever concede. And you had J6, and then you had that followed the summer of crazy. Yeah, we've been through a lot, man. I mean, we've done a lot. And then we had the whole what felt like a 4-year election, and Roe v. Wade got people worked up. Not saying it should or shouldn't have. That's no, whatever. But it did. It got everybody worked up. And then we had an attempt on Trump's life that just missed on national television. Yeah, we had chaos.
Yeah. It just we things have been dialed up to like an 11, right? For like the last 8 years.
Yeah.
And I think the decisiveness of the election has the potential, at least, to cool things down, to kind of be like, well, he won. And, you know, he won the popular vote. He won the electoral vote. He won it easily. This wasn't close. And so, like, and also he only gets one term. So, like, this is it for him, right? He's going to be there for 4 more years. And then, so I think that it has the potential to kind of just be a little bit of a relief, right? To sort of just turn that knob down a little bit and get away from the constant just state of panic that it feels like we've been in for the last 8 years.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. All right, couple things real quick. Thanksgiving's 2 weeks away. We won't do a show until after Thanksgiving. Are you a big Thanksgiving person? Where do you sit on the whole Thanksgiving meal and its importance? A lot of importance is put on this meal. Thanksgiving is not the holiday. The holiday's great. And I'm so glad Ole Miss doesn't play a game on Thanksgiving this year. I get to have like a Thanksgiving day, and then they're going to play the next day, which I'm so happy about. But like the meal itself, I have a very unpopular opinion that the Thanksgiving traditional meal is overrated. And the reason it's overrated is because if it were as good as everyone claims it were, we would find a reason to have it more than once a year.
Maybe this doesn't make for a good podcast, but I think I 100% agree with that opinion. Like, I think it's a tremendous holiday, underrated holiday.
Yeah.
I think that, it is, it's a pretty underrated holiday, but the meal itself, it's just like, I don't like, there are so many things in the traditional meal that, there's so many things in the traditional meal that just like, you just don't ever eat. And so,
well, like if you go to the barbecue place,
right?
Someone goes, hey, Josh, there's this place in Texas or North Carolina or Alabama or whatever that has phenomenal barbecue. And you go up to the thing and they've got brisket and pulled pork and chicken and turkey. What's the last thing you get?
Yeah. Yes. Look, here is how, okay, there's also consensus in my household about this. So the first time that when we moved to Oxford, like, so Thanksgiving is a weird thing for holidays, right? Because we don't have people who are that like anywhere close to us, and we usually like see those people at Christmas time. But it's kind of too close together to travel for both. Now we've done it before for a variety of reasons, but what that means is that occasionally it's just the five of us, and when it's just the five of us, we don't even have turkey.
Oh,
Yeah, like so this like now don't get me wrong, like we have a massive Thanksgiving meal.
yeah.
But we don't even
So
do that.
what do you have? What's the big meal?
Usually it's like ham.
Okay.
Yeah, like it's but that's just because that's what I would prefer. Like if you gave me a choice, ham or turkey, like I would prefer ham. My kids would prefer ham. I think it maybe bothers my wife a little bit, but
because she's a bit of a traditionalist.
Yeah, but it's like sometimes she'll.
And I get it.
Yeah, sometimes she'll still make a little bit of turkey, right?
Yeah,
but like, but like if it's just the five of us,
she'll just do like a turkey breast or something.
Yeah,
just to be like, we did it.
Yeah, and so yeah, I mean, like that. So I'm maybe even more radical than you, is that I don't just believe that it's overrated. We actively just like go with something else when it's when it's just the five of us.
Yeah, so we've had, since the Ole Miss Mississippi State thing has been on Thanksgiving, we've had some times when it's like, well, we'll just do Thanksgiving Friday. And you're like, okay, cool. And then Thursday comes and goes. And then Friday rolls around and you're like, I guess we'll still do it. But like, we didn't really miss it. You know what I mean? It was okay. I do look forward to like this year getting up on Thanksgiving Day and like roasting the turkey and stuff. Not for the turkey itself, but you know, like it gives you an excuse to like pour a beer at 10 o'clock in the morning. It gives you an excuse at 1 o'clock to be like, yeah, shit, I'll have some bourbon. Why not? Right. And so it's kind of like that. But like, and my mom makes great sweet potatoes, but the more you think about them, you're like, why don't we just have a pie instead? I mean, because it's the same thing. It's like, I don't know. It's fine. I enjoy Thanksgiving. I enjoy the football games on TV. The Lions come on. You know, that means, okay, it's almost noon. And then the Cowboys come on and you're like, okay, now there's an excuse to break out the wine or whatever. And then there's going to be a game that night. And this year I won't have to cover said game. And so it's going to be awesome. But yeah, but I like the holiday. I think it's a cool holiday. One of the things I like about it is it's a holiday that everybody recognizes, but there aren't. And I'm not against gifts. Don't get me wrong.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like there's no gifts. You don't go, hey, what are you getting for Thanksgiving? You just kind of enjoy family and hanging out and stuff. And that, to me, is kind of cool. Like, especially if the weather works out and it's a little chilly and you can light a fire and stuff. That's kind of, there's something about it that I find to be quite nostalgic. Like the whole Charlie Brown's Thanksgiving and stuff. I'll if that comes on, I'm watching.
No, when it's just the five of us, we've made our kids do this. When it's just the five of us, like actually, like before we eat, make them talk about what they're thankful for.
Oh,
and like we kind of did it just, you know, because we kind of felt like we should do this. It's just the five of us. Like we should talk about it. And but now, like that, I look back on it as my kids get older. Like I'm like really glad that we did that, because that's like one of the things that I always remember about those Thanksgivings is like because also you always have like the one kid who like, okay, like my kids live like you know, like I mean they're like, if you think about the grand scheme of like world history, right? Like these people are in the 99th percentile of wealth for like people who have ever lived on Earth, right?
Right.
And you'll get to them and you're like, what are you thankful for? And then they sit there for like a minute and a half and just think about it. And it's like, you should have a long list. The list should be long. Like, what are you talking about? Like, this is, you know, like, there are a lot of, you know, and so I always have the one who's kind of like, you know, like,
I don't know.
but, you know, but that's also part of the fun, right? Is that everybody has a laugh about it, and, you know, and it's a good time. But no, underrated holiday, overrated meal, for sure.
All right, last thing. Next time we get together, have the Cubs made a free agent splash of any sort whatsoever? Or am I going to be doing the same thing I'm doing the first week of every December, where I'm like, what are we doing and why?
I'm embarrassed to admit this, but like I don't think I watched like the last 2 months of the season. I just like they were they were so terrible to watch. Like they're so terrible. Like
They were kind of hateable.
yeah, like they're just like because here's the thing is that like there have been years when they have been really, really bad. And I've kind of thought to myself, like, well, at least like they have these couple of young guys, right? And you can
Yeah.
just kind of you can imagine, hey, in a couple of years they're going to be really good, and like they've got these guys in the farm system, and like they'll probably add some people, and like who know, and you can kind of just watch for like those kinds of stories, and then obviously when they're good, they're fun to watch. But like they were the definition of mediocre, and not just the definition of mediocre. It's just like it's so mediocre that it's just that is off-putting. I mean, the benefit for me is like I told you this is like my dad is a huge Tigers fan, and so for me, like I just started watching the Tigers the last like month and a half of the
And they
season.
were very likable.
Yeah, because it was like an insane, it was an insane story, and it was a fun story. And actually it made me a little angry because I'm like looking at it and I'm like, this team doesn't even have the amount of talent that the Cubs have. And they're just making a run. Like,
And they're only like $30 million payroll. Yeah. This is insane. Yeah, it was frustrating. Well, hey, listen, it's been a lot of fun. We'll get back in December. We'll have something before the holidays, but happy Thanksgiving to you and to your family. Safe travels to you guys. And we will be back next month with another edition of the Josh Hendrickson Show. Until then, thanks to everybody in the stream. Thanks to everybody who's been listening, telling people. Thanks to everyone for all the kind comments about the show. On behalf of Josh, we're very appreciative. Until next time, take care.